Hello to all of those who are new here, which according to the analytics is basically all of you. Before I start this video, I just want to say I really do appreciate all the love that the Fallout video got. I read a lot of the nice comments and it's just been really validating that I don't put a lot of work into these videos for nothing. I also saw the constructive comments and even a couple mean ones, which was really funny. And yeah, there are some things with that video I got really wrong. Mostly just because I wasn't expecting 10,000 people to see it, so I was kind of just like sharing my thoughts without fully researching some things. Like the super mutant thing, obviously, and also not acknowledging that Obsidian isn't really as good now as they were when they made New Vegas. I also wouldn't have front-loaded that video with so much negativity, but whatever, life goes on. So like you could probably guess from the title, Bloodborne is my favorite game. I've been saying this for a while, and obviously that's just my personal opinion, but I think my reasons for loving it go beyond just personal bias. On this channel, I try to be really reasonable and try to be as objective with my takes as possible, but I'm going to hit you with a hot take, and I think a lot of you are going to disagree with it, and that's totally fine.
You know what? I'm about to say it.
I think Bloodborne's the best game to come out on the last generation. Bloodborne is near perfect, and my only complaint is that I wish there was more of it. Also that there isn't a PS5 update to play it in 60 FPS, or a PC port, so the only way you can play it is on PlayStation. But those are problems I have with the gaming industry as a whole, more than just this game specifically, so I won't hold it against it. While every game has its low points, Bloodborne included, I think it's the closest FromSoft has ever come to perfection. Every FromSoft game has at least one segment I know I'm gonna have to grit my teeth and just put up with when starting a new playthrough, and Bloodborne has a portion in the middle that isn't my favorite, but everything before and after it is so good I can't complain about it too much. But before I get into specific points about what I like and don't like and spoil things, I'm going to take this opportunity to say, if you haven't played Bloodborne and you have the opportunity to, please play it. I know this is just like the typical YouTuber thing to say, but for real, if you've made the choice not to play it up until now because you didn't like another game you tried in the series, or you just don't think you'll like it, I'm deathly serious. This is your sign to go play it right now. If you have PlayStation Plus, it's free, so you literally have no excuse. So use that watch later playlist and go play an incredible game. Alright, now that it's just those of us who have played the game, or people who can't, sorry, let's discuss what makes Bloodborne so special. The thing everyone and their mothers talks about when discussing From Software games is difficulty. Including me, I'm also a hack fraud. One of my first video essays was about whether or not Dark Souls should have an easy mode. Don't watch that video, it's terrible. But the conclusion I came to that I still agree with is that it doesn't really need a difficulty slider, that makes bosses weaker or less mobs spawn in the world or whatever that would entail. In that video, I came up with reasons that were varying degrees of good and bad, but I think at this point, the way I feel about it is that these games simply aren't as hard as people make them out to be. There have always been options to make them easier like magic, kindling bonfires, summoning help, or whatever, but beyond that, there gets to be this certain point in these games where you get so familiar with them that they really aren't all that hard anymore. Obviously there are tough bosses and stuff, but I just mean mechanically. And I'm not saying this as an elitist or anything to try and talk down to anyone when I say this. I'm nowhere near great at any of these games. I die plenty of times playing them and make countless mistakes in every playthrough. But even I can beat them. I really truly think anyone is capable of getting good enough to beat any From Software game. The only thing that's keeping anyone from beating Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Elden Ring, etc. is whether or not they're willing to spend a good amount of time sucking at something until it starts to click. Now what I just said is a controversial statement to some people. In fact, I'm willing to bet someone watching right now completely disagrees, and that's fine. This is all just my opinion. But the reason I'm so confident in this opinion is because of how bad I was when I first tried to play Bloodborne. I must have spent at least a few hours just trying to get past the very first area. I think I quit before even getting to a boss thinking there was absolutely no way I was going to get even competent at this game, let alone beat it. Some time passed and I decided I was ready to give it another chance. In that time I'd played a little bit of Dark Souls and gotten some confidence with the combat and the rhythm of the game. Now I hadn't made it very far before getting stuck, but I'd come a pretty long way from where I started. Coming back to Bloodborne, I still sucked, but in a different way. I sucked like someone who knew what to do when I had a shield, but not when I didn't. And this is where Bloodborne started to work its magic. After a while of having just awful timing and getting rolled over and over again by basic enemies, eventually I started to get a feel for the rhythm of the game. Then suddenly I was avoiding the slow attacks of these Yharnamites who had previously given me so much trouble. Now, rather than feeling like a brick wall I had to break down with my bare hands, the game felt like a pulse-pounding dance with death and I was hooked. I played nothing but Bloodborne for weeks, and before you know it, I was getting the Platinum Trophy. So sure, that's fine and all, but at the end of the day, that's just my experience with the game. And everyone's experience is going to be different. Or is it? Okay, yes, to a certain extent. But let's talk about what Bloodborne does that makes it so good at putting players on the right path to enjoy the game the same way I was able to. Bloodborne doesn't have any shields. Or at least not any shields worth using. I know, truly groundbreaking information. I did a lot of research for this video. But I think this is a good thing, as do a lot of other people. Some have even gone as far as to say that playing Dark Souls with a shield is the wrong way to play it. Now, I disagree that any way someone chooses to play a game is wrong if they're having fun, but what I do think is using the shield in these games has a shallower learning curve, but also a lower skill ceiling. Some of you already get what I'm saying just from hearing that, but in case you don't, here's an analogy. You like analogies, right? It's like playing a first-person shooter with mouse and keyboard versus a controller. A controller is more intuitive and is going to be easier for someone who's never played video games. But for those willing to go through the struggle of getting the hang of using a keyboard to move, aiming with the mouse is a lot easier than aiming with a controller. So while the keyboard and mouse user had to go through an initial phase of being worse at the game, while they were getting used to using the keyboard to move, eventually that struggle led to the reward of being able to aim easier once they got used to it. Now similarly, a completely new Dark Souls player can pick up a shield and a sword and can learn quickly how to take out lower level enemies at the beginning of the game. They can learn without the fear of being sent back to the bonfire when an enemy will attack and when it's safe to counterattack. Unfortunately, a lot of Dark Souls players never took the time after this early stage to go from blocking attacks to dodging them. And there are two big reasons for this. Number one, Dark Souls doesn't do a great job of showing you that two-handing a weapon or using your offhand for spells can actually make the game easier after the learning curve. And two, it makes the penalty when you make a mistake too much for some players to want to put up with. Bloodborne is designed with ways to address both of these problems. When it comes to showing you the benefits of going shieldless, Bloodborne gives you no choice but to fight this way, because again, the shields at your disposal are basically useless. The player is forced to lay a solid foundation of skill before even really getting into the game. With this choice, Bloodborne employed a sort of you must get this good before continuing system at the very start of the game. Rather than using the shield and tanking hits when you're up against a new enemy or boss, in Bloodborne you have to figure out the proper dodge timing and direction for basically every attack from every enemy. You can't just wait for the boss's combo to be over, and if you have enough stamina to do an attack or two. And the reason this is important is because there are bosses in every FromSoft game that don't allow you to just keep your shield up through combos, because some of those combos are going to drain through your stamina and then keep going until you're on a t-shirt. In Dark Souls, if you're using the shield, what you're going to have to do is avoid some attacks in the combo by walking back with your shield up, catching some of the attacks with the shield, then using the little stamina you have left to hit the enemy for minimal damage, rinse and repeat for sometimes up to like 20 minutes and not make any mistakes or have to start over. Or you can dodge the attacks you have learned, block the ones that you haven't, and then do less damage when you're punishing because you're only one-handing the weapon as opposed to two-handing. And that's why it's actually easier to use two hands and dodge. Fights take significantly less time, and while it might take you some time to figure out, you'll find yourself spending 20 minutes just to lose at the end of a boss fight significantly less. Now there are some people out there who enjoy playing the game with the shield. They enjoy playing slowly and carefully, and again, if you're having fun, there's nothing wrong with that, and you should keep doing your thing. But judging by the fact that I've heard tons and tons of stories of people who played Dark Souls, didn't have a great time, then played Bloodborne and absolutely loved it, which helped them figure out how to go back and enjoy the other ones they played before and didn't like. In my opinion, dodging and being aggressive is more fun for the majority of people, so teaching those people to play that way is a good thing. I also understand that some people really don't like spending their free time practicing so they can get good enough to even start enjoying a game. I have a job too, and there are some days I don't feel like spending the evening sweating my balls off on a video game. But Bloodborne doesn't just leave you hanging out to dry. In fact, it can be forgiving in ways that FromSoft hasn't been in games before or since. The rally system allows players to make mistakes but still recover from them in a way that should have led to someone getting an award.
Game of the year 2015 is The Witcher 3.
The way it works is you regain some of your health if you hit an enemy soon enough after they hit you. This allows you to make some mistakes and then be able to make up for them immediately. But that's not to say Bloodborne's too easy either. Wearing a helmet when you're riding your bike keeps you safer, but it's not going to save you from a head-on collision with an SUV. And Bloodborne does have you flying into oncoming traffic the way any good game should. You're still going to die if you try face tanking entire combos. It just means if you miss one or two timings, you're going to be able to get that health back while also doing some damage. What this leads to is players learning how to play fast and aggressive, but having the freedom to make mistakes and have it not be super frustrating, up until a point where you just stop making mistakes. Unless you're me, then you'll never get to that point. I also love how this ties in thematically because the hunters are supposed to be these ruthless killers who enjoy hunting down and killing beasts. So then you start feeling the same way, almost like an addiction to how good the combat feels. But I have more about that later. The way Bloodborne handles parrying makes it a lot more appealing to learn. Before, parrying was a huge risk. If you weren't perfect with your parry timing, you just got hit with a full strength attack, which means you have to use a flask, and then the rest of the level or boss just got harder for you. Or that attack could just kill you right there because Miyazaki doesn't care about your feelings. In Bloodborne, making the parry weapon a gun means you can parry an enemy's attack when you're out of their damage range. Now this can be really hard to time because you have to factor in how far your bullet has to travel, so it's not a cheat code, but it is possible. But the other thing Bloodborne does is it makes the parry an offensive move rather than a defensive one. So if you miss your timing in Bloodborne, rather than always just taking a hit, sometimes your shot won't parry the enemy, but it will stagger them a little bit. So while you aren't rewarded with the damage you would get from a parry, you still got to avoid the attack the enemy was about to hit you with. This allows you to dictate the speed of the fight because you have 20 opportunities to cancel out the enemy's attack without dodging and keep doing damage. You can even sacrifice some of your life to get more bullets if you're feeling saucy. Now this doesn't always work, and there are some times an attack will still just hit you if your parry timing's wrong, so it is still a risk reward system. They've just made that risk a little less risky so new players feel like it's an option they can try. So an interesting thing happens when a game gives you the tools that Bloodborne does. When From Software decided to incentivize being aggressive, it allowed them to create enemies and bosses that are just as aggressive. Most enemies in this game, if placed into any of the previous games, would have been some of the hardest in the game because they were not made with this level of speed in mind. It's like the difference between playing Mike Tyson's Punch-Out versus fighting the real prime Mike Tyson. In the game you can watch for the telegraph and dodge at the right time, and then you get a few punches as your reward for knowing the correct timing. It's not easy and it's a lot of fun in its own regard, but it's not this. Bloodborne enemies don't feel like an AI in a video game designed to test your ability to dodge and play fair. They feel like these monsters frothing at the mouth because they want to kill you so bad. And the only way you're going to avoid that is if you get just as cutthroat as them. And this fits the tone of the game thematically. You go from a newbie just trying to survive to a bloodthirsty hunter of the night, searching out fights so you can cleanse the world of this filth. This isn't to say Bloodborne is objectively better because its enemies are harder. I just think it's a cool way they were able to change up the formula a little bit, and I personally prefer it. I also think, judging by the way From Software bosses have kept this level of aggression and speed, if maybe toned down a little bit, shows that it's resonated with players, not just me. So all the stuff I just said about the gameplay, all that's the most important reason why Bloodborne's my favorite game of all time, but something that I feel like doesn't get talked about nearly enough is how original its world is. Dark Souls takes place in your typical fantasy world with dragons, knights, magic, etc. And don't get me wrong, I love that type of setting. I love the Lord of the Rings, I loved Game of Thrones for 4 seasons, so this isn't a knock against Dark Souls or Elden Ring. You could say I'm a pretty big fan of those games as well. The thing Bloodborne did differently though is it made me obsessed with a setting I thought I wouldn't even be interested in. Originally when I saw this game for the first time, it was when the Game Grumps were playing it. And at that time I thought, well, there are people who like this sort of settings, but I prefer a happier and more colorful game, and this just looks a little bit too depressing to me. Then something awful happened. My parents forced me to get a job in high school and I had to work at Burlington Coat Factory. This meant, 1, I had to spend my afternoons pretending to tidy the home section, and 2, I had disposable income. And what does an 18-year-old with no romantic prospects to speak of spend money on? That's right, video games. The Grumps kept talking about how great this game was during their playthrough, so I thought maybe I could put up with the setting if the gameplay was fun enough. Then after a while, Bloodborne's setting became one of my favorite things about it. The eerie darkness of the world as the game gets deeper into the night, the beauty of the architecture in Yharnam contrasted with the dark, decrepit shacks of the Forbidden Woods and Fishing Hamlet. The gothic horror aesthetic had seeped its way into my veins, and I've spent the years since searching for media that can give me that same feeling. But nothing's quite the same. Bloodborne may have been inspired by the works of H.P. Lovecraft, but there's just nothing else like it. The closest thing to me is the other Soulsborne games, so for that very reason the series has had me in a chokehold, and I can't say I'm upset about it. I've found a few books and movies here and there that have gotten close to giving me the same feeling Yharnam does, but usually those just make me want to play Bloodborne again. I've beaten Bloodborne 3 times, 4 if you count the recording of this video. That probably doesn't sound like a lot. Something always just comes along, and you know how ADHD works. You probably use TikTok, but I love Bloodborne. I even have the Platinum Trophy. That's right, I brought it up twice. Do you have any idea how long I spent in those Chalice dungeons? Saying that, the boss that has always caused me to struggle the most is Ludwig. Every time I get to him in the DLC, I know I'm going to be at a wall for dozens of attempts. The first phase is hard enough, then after an incredible cutscene,
You were at my side all along. My true mentor, my guiding moonlight.
oh great, it just got even harder. Lovely. I've spent hours of my life trying and retrying over and over again to beat this boss. It hasn't always been fun either. I've had to take breaks from this game that have lasted multiple months because of how frustrated I've gotten at this specific boss. Now, I'm not a lore expert, clearly, but I do have a pretty good idea of Ludwig's story. He was the first hunter to collaborate with the Healing Church. He eventually grew a corps of loyal hunters who he trained to fight honorably to combat the growing infestation of beasts. But he, like many hunters out to do the right thing, eventually succumbed to the bloodlust, transforming him into the hideous beast he is now. After the fight, when you finally bested him, his head's just on the ground still alive so you can talk to him. And if you're wearing the garb of the Healing Church, he asks you this.
Tell me, good hunter of the church, have you seen the light? Are my church hunters the honorable Spartans? I hoped they would be.
Now the real answer to this question is no. His church hunters have all gone mad, just as he did, but every time I talked to him and had the option to tell him the truth, that all his efforts were for nothing and that he may have even done more harm than good, I lie. I tell him it wasn't in vain, and that his sacrifice was a heroic one.
Ah, good. That is a relief. To know I did not suffer such denigration for nothing.
After everything this guy put me through in the game and in real life, I can't help but give him an honorable death. To me, that's not only the sign of an incredible game and story, but a true work of art. Anytime I can feel this much respect for ones and zeros that have taken countless hours of my life, something truly special has happened. And Bloodborne is full of little tragedies like this. Gehrman and Lady Maria's stories are two of my favorite, but it also has these really great little bits of environmental storytelling, like this door all the way back in the very opening area. After clearing out all the enemies, you'll realize you still hear a knocking for some reason. You notice the door is being pounded from the other side. What could be doing that? Maybe one of the lycanthropes like this one on fire, an aggrieved relative coming for revenge? Maybe a boss is about to come crashing to the door, or a new creature you haven't even seen yet. You walk around through the opening and... well, I can't say you were what I was expecting. Maybe I can talk to him. I mean, you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, right? No game has given me the range of emotions Bloodborne has. Fear, laughter, anger, sadness, love because of these cute little babies you can make wear top hats. I have no idea how they pulled it off, but Bloodborne is so much more than just a dark, depressing, sad world. Like the cashier at Hot Topic, beneath a creepy exterior is a three-dimensional living thing that probably has a complicated relationship with their dad. And speaking of the DLC, The Old Hunters takes Bloodborne from a 9.5 out of 10 to an 11 out of 10. Without it, I think the game would be a little short, but also without a doubt it has the best bosses in the game, and arguably a few of the best in the series. Ludwig, who I talked about, Orphan of Kos, my personal favorite Lady Maria. I could go on and on about it, but really it's just best to be played through, so go do it. So... because I want you to take my opinion seriously as someone who talks about video games, I suppose I can be objective and talk about the things I don't think are good about Bloodborne. But, because I am a deeply unserious person, I'm going to attempt to justify those things anyway. What? It's my channel, I can do what I want.
He did the monster mash.
Conceptually, I can see what they were going for here. Theoretically, when you have a procedurally generated aspect of a game, it allows for infinite replayability, because you can always enter a new dungeon and experience something you've never played before. The problem here is pretty much every one of them is incredibly similar and not very fun because, surprise surprise, something designed by an actual human is better because it had thought put into it to make it fun. To get to one of the bosses required for the platinum, you have to spend a lot of time in the Chalice dungeons, so I personally don't have a lot of good things to say about them. I've wasted way too much of my life in there to say anything positive. But at least it is cool that technically there is an infinite amount of Bloodborne out there to experience. Also, some of the bosses in there are cool, but you know what have made them even cooler? Designing, I don't know, a good level around them? I don't like the collectible healing item way of doing it. There's not much that's more annoying than having to stop fighting a boss because you have to go farm more blood vials. It was annoying in Demon Souls, you fixed it in Dark Souls, so why go back to it in this game? But they did improve upon it at least. Rather than just being able to go into a fight with 100 grass and basically breaking the game, they limit you to 20. This is good because eventually you're going to run out. Meaning you can't just keep making mistakes endlessly and then be able to use all your healing items as a crutch. But also that you're not just going to blow through all of them in a couple bad attempts. Also, I was going to say it fits better in this world because it's not as magic like in the other ones, but they could have come up with a justification to give you some sort of blood flask or whatever. Yeah, so it's bad, but at least it's an improvement on how bad it was before. So Bloodborne isn't perfect. It has the types of annoying bullshit areas and bosses the devs love to put in all their games to remind us that at the end of the day they get off on our pain. Areas like Yahar Ghul, with the regenerating blood enemies and the giant skelly blobs, are best just run right past if you can. The good news is usually that's not super hard to do in Bloodborne, but it would still just be better to not have to do that. Bloodborne has pretty consistently good bosses. Compared to other games in the series, but also just other video games in general, I think Bloodborne has incredibly few stinkers in the bunch. That being said, there are bad ones, and even I can't deny that. Rom and the Shadow of Yharnams are pretty bad in inexcusable ways. The shadows are annoying on their own, but when you factor in the marathon you have to run to get back to them, every death is that much more frustrating. Then immediately after you're hit with, in my opinion, the worst boss in the game. Rom is designed with annoying you in mind. She doesn't test any of the abilities you've acquired through playing the game. Instead, you're forced to to manage a big group of enemies while avoiding these ranged attacks that can one-shot you. Then when you finally get up close, she doesn't have any moves to test your dodging abilities or reaction time, just moves that are incredibly telegraphed and force you to just run away to make the fight last even longer than it already was. 2 bad fights back to back, and to top it off, they're both mandatory. At least the game gets back on track after those 2 stinkers with the One Reborn and Mikolash. Alright, but up until this point and for the rest of the game afterwards, the bosses are great. But this dip in the middle is a bit tough to get through on repeat playthroughs. It's nowhere near the worst dip in quality in a section of a From Software game though. Alright, now that I've washed my mouth out with soap, it's time to get back to the positives. And I thought it would be fitting to end this video talking about the game's 3 different endings. From Software decided they were going to give us the opportunity to end the story 3 different ways and make them all varying degrees of depressing. The first and easiest ending to achieve is to let Gehrman kill you and send you back to the waking world. I like to call this the selfish ending because rather than try to change anything about the world, you just say get me out of this nightmare and let somebody else fix it. Really not a good guy type of thing to do, but at least you get to wake up to a beautiful sunrise. Next is an ending that isn't selfish, but maybe just misguided. If you refuse Gehrman's offer of waking up from the nightmare, you have to kill him, and let me just say, if you've gotten to this point in the game and you're not just trying to get the achievement for all the different endings, you gotta fight him. If you don't, you're missing out on one of the best bosses in the entire game. But if you do care about the lore, you also shouldn't accept it, because it's nice to free Gehrman from his shackles. He's been stuck here for an indefinite amount of time, and by refusing and killing him, you're freeing him from his imprisonment, which it's clear he's miserable in.
Oh, Lawrence, Master Willem, somebody help me. Unshackle me, please. Anybody. I've had enough of this dream. The night blocks all sight. Oh, somebody, please.
The problem is, now you're forced to be the new prisoner, so you're helping someone else by sacrificing your own freedom. Finally, the best ending, which I mean, still isn't great for your character, it's in no means a happy ending. So if you consume 3 umbilical cords, God I love this game. At the end when this big creepy alien dude tries to capture you and turn you into the new Gehrman, you repel him and you're able to fight him, learning his name is Moon Presence. It's not a crazy fight or anything, but afterwards you turn into a baby Great One, which basically means you've become one of the gods who control over this world, and presumably, that means you're able to save what's left of humanity at the cost of your own. Really powerful stuff, and I mean just super bittersweet and fitting of this game's mood. I call this ending the selfless ending because you're literally sacrificing yourself as a person to end this cycle, freeing humanity from its endless nightmare. Thanks so much for watching this video, friends. Hold on before you exit the video. This is not just the typical YouTuber outro. I do have some things to say that you might be interested in, so stick around. This video took me a really long time, partially because I wanted to make it really good and do Bloodborne justice, partially because life has just been really crazy, partially because I got sick and literally couldn't record the voiceover for like 2 weeks. I also started playing Elden Ring again and may or may not have gotten very distracted playing nothing but that for like a week. Also, I'm like halfway through a playthrough of Dark Souls 2 in my continuing journey of ranking every boss in the franchise, so that shouldn't be too much longer, I hope. That was going to be the next video, but I just started thinking about Bloodborne and suddenly this video just started materializing. Also, I know it's way too early to start talking about the P word, but I do have some ideas for it, like doing live streams of the playthroughs of the games that I'm going to be reviewing or ranking the bosses in. So if you'd be interested in supporting the channel and me, and helping these videos come out quicker by allowing me to not be as worried about money, let me know in the comments and I'll definitely start doing that. Also, if you're interested in keeping up with me between videos, because I kind of just disappear after posting them, I'm always on Twitter, which is really bad for my mental health, but really good for you if you want to talk to me. Also, there's the Discord. I made it a while ago and it should be pretty much ready to go. It just needs you guys to join it, so that would be a great place to talk to me as well. Okay, now this outro is getting kind of long and I have more Elden Ring to play, so let me slip back into the void until I emerge with more content for you to enjoy. Thank you for watching.